Good afternoon. My name is Kiran Gandhi, and today Becky and I sort of chose a theme when we were talking of evolving models of intergenerational feminist interaction. That's a bit of a mouthful, but when we were sharing our stories, the theme that kept coming up was how women in different generations look out for their own women by carving out spaces for them, not by forcing women who they are menteeing to adapt to the world around them. And that was something that I particularly experienced in the two stories that I want to share with you. The main sort of point that I want to drive home when I speak about the two mentors that I had in my life are they constantly aim to bring out the best in me. And as a female who's in a sort of male-dominated environment, it's very difficult to take risks and to do things differently. And I think the theme that I want to express is the creation of a safety net by a mentor for a mentee. My story starts in New York City. I was born there, and I went to an all-girls private school on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And between 97 and 2000, which were my 4th, 5th, and 6th grade years, I had moved to India with my family. And in 7th grade, I came back, and I was at the same school. But all the girls had changed a lot. You know, everyone was wearing like the cool bag, cool shoes. They had sort of these teeny bopper boyfriends. I didn't have any of that stuff. I was still on my India, Bombay fads. I think we liked Pokemon over there, but that was like not cool enough when I came back to India. And we had a science class in 7th grade, and our teacher's name is Miss Olson. And you know, the first, second, third class, one thing I noticed about Miss Olson is that she was like the cool teacher. And she was the cool teacher because she was so honest. She would say things like, ladies, I hate the way this textbook teaches this chapter. We have to read it because it's the way it's supposed to be, but I want to teach it to you by going up to the greenhouse and planting seeds. And I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, she's being real with us. I mean, we all know. I read the reading last night. I didn't like it, but she was real. And then it happened again. You know, she would reference pop culture. Like, oh, you know, I don't even want to give an example, but I always felt that the way she taught made things relevant. She made me feel like my actual education, I could map everything I was learning in science, in biology, to the real world. And what I would do is after school, I'd want to go and give her my best work. I'd want to show her, hey, how did this test look? Or why did I get this wrong? And she would always be so honest with me. Sometimes she would even move the conversation beyond just class. She would say, so what's going on? You know, how's school, how's life, how's friends? And basically our session sort of turned into this mentor-mentee relationship. I'd want to tell her about the music I was making. I was a drummer, and I just started drumming that year at camp. I was like, this is cool thing that I'm doing. We don't really have drumming opportunities here at Chapin, but what do you think of this song that I wrote with my band? I put it in quotations because it was like a Nirvana cover band or something. It was pretty bad. But you know, what do you think of this? And she'd be like, hey, that's really cool. You should actually show this to your friends. This is awesome, you know? So she'd encourage me. So I was like, well, if this person who's super cool thinks I'm cool, I feel stronger. I feel that what I'm doing is relevant and it matters. She then, even though I finished my 7th grade, our relationship continued. Even when I moved on to high school, it was 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, I found myself saying, hey, what do you think of my student government speech? Do you mind coming to my volleyball game? I want you to see how because she was also a coach on volleyball, how does my set look, etc. A couple of things that she did specifically were really give me that space to be honest and be myself, and kind of push where she thought I wasn't doing a good job, but then also be real and give me positive affirmation where she thought I was doing a good job. And because it was so honest, anytime there was criticism, it didn't feel scary or push me away. It made me want to be better. And I think it's this element of reinforcing fearlessness that I sort of developed and saw value in having a mentor that forms the second part of my story. So from this point, I had gone to Georgetown. I was a math major, and I was playing drums a lot more in DC now. I was working for a record label, and of course, by the time senior year came around, I didn't really know exactly where I'd want to go or where I can add value. I had this music thing going on, but I also had this mathematics thing going on. So I took a bit of a leap of faith, and I moved to LA, and I had an internship at Interscope Records. And it's Eminem, it's Lady Gaga, it's Maroon 5, it's like all the cool artists that I really liked. And I only had an internship, and I have like pretty serious Indian parents, so when they heard that their math major from Georgetown is doing an internship for Lady Gaga, like, it was the worst thing. But I was like, no, no, it's gonna be all right. It's gonna be okay, because I'm passionate about it and I care. So I was an intern for Interscope Records. It was 2011. And the head of digital marketing, whose name is Brooke Michael, she was a recent MBA from USC. And she found out that one of the interns in the program was a math major. She's like, okay, send this kid into my office. So I go, I'm super excited. And she had similar qualities to Miss Olson. And I remember thinking that really quite immediately. She was very outlandish, very honest, very funny. She's like, so what are you doing here? What are you, math major? Like, this is great. Like, we never get you guys. We always get the communications major. I was like, yeah, well, I love drumming and I love music, and my happiest times are when I'm playing music out in DC. And I think as an undergrad, I can add a sort of leadership value and components of math. And I mean, who doesn't need someone to crunch numbers, right? She's like, well, that's pretty perfect. We are getting numbers in from Spotify these days that the labels never had to use. From YouTube, we've never even seen that stuff. We have a marketing department, a sales department, an artist and repertoire department, a tour marketing department, but none of those really see themselves as having the responsibility of looking at data from these recent sources. Why don't I give you some numbers and play with it and let's see what happens. So that's sort of how my position as an analyst started. She saw an opportunity in me and gave me a chance, and I went for it. I provided some data the first time around about the relationship between how when artists put their music on YouTube, you'll see a huge spike right in the first 2 weeks, but then they go down week by week, and how that's actually the opposite of behavior on Spotify. On Spotify, an artist puts their song, and it's very low in the beginning and goes higher and higher. Things that Brooke did really well, I actually would observe from afar that she would employ traditionally female qualities in sort of a male-dominated environment. And I was learning a lot during your presentation, actually, and I wanted to share something that I think a lot about, which is that, in corporate environments, I think they were built by men for men, with the assumption that you had a wife at home to take care of a lot of things. It's not a good thing or a bad thing, it's just what it was. So then, when you bring more and more women into the workplace, first of all, we all need wives. This whole wives thing is like a great thing. And I think when you have women in the workplace who are trying to adapt to male qualities in a place where male qualities were sort of associated with good and female qualities were associated with bad, you see one of two things happen. One is that female qualities are sort of punished, they're weak, they're undesirable, and male qualities are upheld. And I think that's a lot what we were talking about, the female, so that the queen bee mentality is, we want to see as many women as possible look like a man. But I think when you do that, you're sort of setting yourself up to fail, because wonderfully, we are women, we are not men. And when I watched her, I sort of saw her do a bit of both. There were times when she was in a meeting with all men and she kind of bro out with them. Somehow she knew the scores from the football game. I was like, Brooke, that's impressive. Like, you're killing it right now. And it's just a kind of a skill set of catering to your audience, whether it's man, woman, music industry, TV industry, whatever. You're catering to your audience. But a lot of what I thought she did really well was carve out space for the female experience. So by that I mean being really nurturing, being warm, buying our team lunch every now and then, making sure we're fed. If we looked sick, she'd be like, hey, take some medicine, go home. She'd notice those things. I'm not so good about sort of the gender studies, but I hear a lot of people say that women are a little bit more perceptive than men, or that they allow themselves to be perceptive and in a way that is good as opposed to bad. And I think she did that really well. If I wasn't having a good day, she's, Kiran, come in. Is it your relationship? Are you stressed out? What's going on? Is it your family? And that's also what Ms. Olson used to do. She'd allow it to go into a personal place. Now, some mentees don't like that. They like their work life and their professional life to be separate. But I think what Brooke did well was sort of check. She's like, what makes Kiran tick? Will she respond well to something like that, or will that kind of freak her out? And I loved it. I had just moved to LA. I didn't know that many people, so being able to have my work life be something that was very personal as well made me want to give Brooke the best work that I could. And it talks to that theme that I mentioned in the beginning, which is how can a mentor get the best out of their mentees right from the beginning? And I think it's by creating an environment where the mentee feels like they can take a risk. I can be honest with her. Oh, well, to be honest, my parents are actually going to get a divorce, and I didn't know that. And I'm just trying to number crunch these numbers. It's actually really cathartic to do that. But that's really what's going on. And she'd be like, hey, let's talk about it. My parents went through the same thing. And that's so amazing. I think that perhaps I'm wrong, and the men in this room can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do think that's a female thing, to allow the personal to blend with the professional. And I think in some elements, it can be very empowering as opposed to seen as unprofessional, which many seem to do. I think in terms of wrapping up, I really liked what Brooke did, which was not, because many mentors can say they want to kick my ass to prepare me for what the difficulties that are to come. But instead she said, no, I don't want Kiran to have to deal with irritating things that I had to deal with in my professional life. So why don't I carve out room for her to do things differently, because I have the power as the boss to do that. So one example is the fact that I'm a drummer. Sometimes I'd have shows, and I'd ask if I can leave a little bit early. Now, I don't have a family, but in my opinion, that's a bit of a parallel. If I had a child, I might want to pick them up from school a little bit earlier. And instead of saying, hey, you know what, I never could do that, you can't do that either, she said, okay, let's make it work. Why don't you come in early tomorrow, and I'll let you go early tonight. Cool, thank you so much. I would love to do that. That's like really fair, and like I would come in extra early because I was so grateful that she had my back like that. I think that's what real mentorship is all about. The other takeaway that I wrote is essentially something that I've already stressed quite a bit, which is that she had my back. She really did. If I had a weak moment, I could be real about it. If I had a strong moment, I could be real about it. And those are the things that I think both of my mentors did really well. Thank you.
This on all right? Okay, awesome. I'm Becky. I'm a second-year student here at HBS. And so when Kiran and I talked, as she mentioned, we talked about the importance of sort of intergenerational feminist relationships. And for me, I haven't had very many female mentors. I've been in very predominantly male environments, and so this queen bee talk resonated quite a bit. So I wanted to talk about 3 female relationships that each modeled opportunities. Because for me, being able to imagine something, I'm not a really creative person, but being able to see something makes it more concrete and more possible. So there are 3 relationships that have each sort of opened up for me the opportunities of what the world had to offer. And the first one is about my mom. So my dad is incredibly professionally successful. He's a journalist. He has moved his way up from being, on the assignments desk to being bureau chief of an important bureau. And now he's the one they call in when there's emergencies. He's gotten promotions and awards, but everybody who knows my parents knows that my mom is the smart one. And there's no, it's not a joke. Everybody knows that, oh, Fred's great, but, Ilka's the smart one. And that was the dynamic that I grew up with at home, that mom was smart and academic, and there was no question in anyone's mind. The best example of this is I'm a little bit mathy, not a math major, but more so than people often expect from their female child. And I'd ask my dad for help, and he'd say, math wasn't invented when I was in school. And my mom would roll her eyes and be like, math was invented in ancient Greece, which also may not be correct, but anyway, so what this modeled for me is that it was an acceptable model of female intelligence. It was okay to be good at school. And that was really important to me because, like Kiran, I grew up abroad, and I moved back to the United States when I was 16. And I moved back to Springfield, Virginia, a town nobody has probably heard of. Oh, yeah? A DC residents know? Okay. So I went to a really big public school, and where we were very clearly tracked, like you were on the honors track, or you were on the remedial track, or you were on the normal kid track. And everybody knew who was in each track because you knew. And there were sort of 2 or 3 models for female intelligence. If you were a smart girl, you could be a geek, really nerdy and like an indoor kid. You could hide it as successfully as you could. It worked better if you were really pretty or good at sports. Or you could be brassy. And let's just put that as how I was described. We'll put that gently. And I found that chafed. But every night I was able to come home and talk to my mom and be like, I want to participate in class, but I don't want to be this person. And she said, you don't always have to be this person. my mom is incredibly shy. And so my mom worked for many years and then became a stay-at-home mom after she sort of ramped down for a number of reasons. And one of them is that her model of female intelligence was very difficult in her generation. She's incredibly shy, and she hates competition. And she would tell me stories of, she was a biology major, and she switched to English because this was during a time when admission to medical school was so competitive that if you left your notes out, people would steal them and rip them up. And she just opted out of that whole system. And so while I saw that it was okay to be smart, I didn't see a way to be ambitious or driven. And this is in no way a failing of my mother. She's an excellent woman, but it was a difficult position for her, and it made it difficult for me. So when I went to a women's college, to Barnard, where all of a sudden everybody in the room was a smart woman. And so you could be whatever you wanted. So I tried everything. I played rugby, and I joined a religious group, and I joined a political group, and you could be whatever it was aside from being a smart woman. And in that time, I met the second foundational relationship for me. Her name is Dasha. She's a Holocaust survivor who I met through DeRote, which is in New York, and intergenerational. It exists solely to create intergenerational relationships, primarily so that elderly and homebound seniors who don't have family can have somebody visit them on a regular basis. And so for the 10 years that I lived in New York, I visited her every Sunday. And so she and I are both part of the same incredibly traditional religious group where family values are what you would expect them to be. The women tend to take, if they take a job, a second career job, one that's more flexible and allows a lot more room. You expect one of the ways that you choose a life partner is an economic analysis. That sounds a little crass, but you think about these things like when I'm marrying, if I'm gonna be a teacher and they're gonna be a teacher, how's that gonna work out? Like it's a consideration. It's a very traditional in-group. And she raised her son alone. She got divorced in a time when divorce was completely unacceptable. And she raised him from the time he was 6 or 7 all the way through adulthood and sent him off to school. And she works and continues. She's in her 80s now, and she goes to work 3 days a week. And what she showed for me is a model of female self-sufficiency, of that you could do something that you enjoyed and sometimes that you didn't enjoy, and that work was work, and that was okay for a woman. You didn't have to follow your passion to the exclusion of economic importance, but you also didn't have to think only about what was gonna make you the most money. And for me, that was it was very eye-opening, especially as I see my my colleagues from Barnard, my classmates, who are now starting to, at this point, opt out or ramp down for a variety of different reasons, and some of them not. And so we have these ongoing discussions about, how do we model in whatever way for our next generation. And so, as I mentioned, since I'm from this community and I worked in pretty exclusively male-dominated environments, I'd never had a female mentor. I had a terrific male boss before I came to HBS who supported me in ways that I didn't know I needed to be supported, and modeled, actually, he was a really strong family man. He left at 5:15 every single night to go be home with his kids, and once or twice a month, he'd go home early because he was a Boy Scout Cub leader. And when his wife called, he always picked up the phone. And so it created this normalcy around the importance of family and of other commitments. He would treat other people's commitments that weren't necessarily family as just as important, because that's another way to be inclusive. And it sort of modeled this interesting behavior, which was great, but he was not able to model for me what it could be like for me. He had been very successful, he had worked his way up, but he had worked in ways that would have been unsustainable for me as a woman who wants to, and will soon, have kids and a family. And so when I got into HBS, I started reaching out to all of my social networks, and I said, does anybody know someone from my community who has an MBA from anywhere who's working doing anything? Any guesses how many I got? None. And I'm sure there are some, and part of it is the limit of my social network, but I couldn't find any. And so I had this moment of panic of, what have I done? Am I going to be the only, what have I done? How is this life going to be sustainable? And so actually my sister-in-law, who is also a great feminist and a great leader, she sat down to me and she said, in 20 years, you're going to be going to talk to people about, how difficult it was and how great there are so many more. I was like, I hope so. But I was pretty panicked, and I came to Boston. One of the nice things about HBS is that it is so intentionally diverse. But the downside of this, as Kiran and I had discussed a little bit, was that everybody can start to feel like an N of one, like you're the only person who is like you, which is what happens when you get a big diverse group. And it's great because you find commonalities, but sometimes it can be incredibly isolating when you try and count. So I went to the leader of my religious group and I said, how many women have graduated from HBS from our group in the last 15 years? He said, including you and the other woman in my class? And I said, yeah. He goes, 1. Okay, so at this point I was like, okay, at least somebody else has done it. And when I went to religious services one morning, and someone said to me, you should meet Debbie. Debbie went to HBS. And I said, okay, that's it. Like, I don't care what she does. I don't care if she worked for 10 minutes. Like, I have to meet this woman. So I went to go talk to her, and at this point I had sort of built up this idea that there were careers that I couldn't do, that wouldn't work for me and for my lifestyle. And I went to talk to her, and she has been on the executive committee of one of the biggest consulting firms. She's had a fabulous career and has raised 4 kids with a husband who works, and I was like, oh, maybe there is something else I can do. And she refers to herself as the queen of leaning in, and has sort of opened up to me this idea that I could do whatever I want. There's nothing that's off the table, but that it's all a choice. And that I should be aware, I sound like a first-year lead class, but that I should be aware in every moment, what is the choice I'm making and what I'm balancing, and that those choices don't have to be forever or even for long term, but that every day you should be aware of what choice you're making. And modeling that choice making successfully has sort of opened up my ideas of, maybe I could be a CEO. Maybe if that's what I wanted, it would be possible, and I don't have to put off the rest of my life. Am I going to be the youngest CEO? Already not, but I could get there if that's something I wanted, and I wouldn't necessarily have to give up who I am. And so being able to see those sort of 3 different ideas of opportunities and seeing what they could mean has been really helpful for me. And hopefully, as we see more women at HBS and more women in business, we can continue to model those sort of new options, and because it's easier to follow a path if you can see somebody who's done it.